So it was just a year ago this week that millions of us were tuned in to the Olympics, Winter Olympics in South Korea. It was 2 weeks of amazing competition, and new world records were set, amazing things happened, and in the first week of the Olympics last year, we got to witness this.
Last on so many occasions, now moving up on the inside, into second place.
They're all completely gassed. They've given it everything on the global bucket, and Steven Nielsen leading Jesse Diggins into the final turn. Can Diggins answer?
As the roars rattle around the cross-country stadium in Pyeongchang, Sweden, the U.S., and Norway come into the line.
Here comes Diggins!
On the outside, Diggins making the play around Sweden. Jesse Diggins to the line.
Yes!
And it is Jesse Diggins delivering a landmark moment that will be etched in U.S. Olympic history. The first ever cross-country gold medal for the U.S.
And with that win, that victory, Jesse Diggins, who lives just down the road in Afton, Minnesota, went from being a relatively obscure and unknown athlete and was launched into legendary status as an Olympic champion. So no doubt, the biggest day of her life. For now on, in Olympic lore, when people start to talk about those great champions, Jesse Diggins from Afton, Minnesota is going to be on that list. But I would argue that that day was made possible because of all the faithful and consistent work that she did throughout her life. From the first time she strapped on a pair of cross-country skis, those tireless hours that she put in practicing and training, weightlifting, eating right, rehabbing from injuries, pushing through injuries and plateaus and difficult times. All those moments spent without the cowbells ringing and the people cheering and the announcer going crazy and screaming, "Yes, yes, yes!" That Jesse Diggins was able to become a champion. She was able to kind of set her legacy because of all that hard and diligent and consistent and faithful work that she did to get to that point. Because I'm sure at some point along the way, doubt entered into her mind. Am I ever going to truly get to that Olympic level? Is my dream ever going to become a reality? But somewhere along the way, she also listened to that encouraging voice, and maybe it was from friends or family members or a coach, and maybe it was just that still small voice of God that got stuck in her head that said, "Keep going. You will make this." But Jesse Diggins is a model for helping us to understand that champions are truly made when no one is watching. That what we do and the steps that we take and the work that we put in day after day, week after week, year after year, are those most important foundations that will lead to those big moments, that will lead us to set a legacy and a foundation for our lives. For legacies, what we leave behind, are truly built on faithfulness and consistency. And we have a great example of that in the biblical character of Tabitha, who we don't hear all that much about until we get to Acts chapter 9. In fact, she is and would have been in history a very obscure and relatively unknown person if it had not been for the documentation of her faithfulness in the book of Acts. So Jeff Mannion writes a very excellent, what we call exegesis of this text in his book. And he calls this the Tabitha factor. And I want to share a significant portion of what he talks about when he talks about the importance of Tabitha's life. He says, Tabitha is dead, and a Christian community mourns. The grief-stricken believers summon the Apostle Peter, who can hear the weeping before he even reaches the front door. When Peter arrives, he is taken to the upstairs room where Tabitha's body lies. A group of widows surrounds him, weeping and showing him robes and other clothing Tabitha made for them. Desperate poverty was the common experience of widows in an Eastern culture. And in the world of the Bible, life could be unbearably difficult for a woman who had lost her husband and who had no adult sons or brothers to care for her. Tabitha stepped into their distress and devoted her days to reducing the suffering of those who felt very much alone. Knowing this, imagine the tear-streaked faces of the widows who now surround Peter. Hands lift garments and grief-filled voices repeat, "She made this for me." What did a new cloak or robe mean to these widows? The clothes Tabitha made for these destitute women meant warmth, dignity, and hope. Joppa, where the story occurs, was on Israel's Mediterranean coast, and a cloak protected against the cold winter winds that whipped off the sea. I think we can see the need for cloaks and coats today, right? Tabitha's goodness provided shelter from the cold. But apart from the functional aspect of clothing is the element of dignity. Did a widow feel more dignified after exchanging a threadbare robe for one that was new and beautiful? Tabitha's goodness diminished shame and enhanced self-respect. I believe the clothing Tabitha wove with her own hands also brought these women a strong dose of hope. When a widow received a new garment from Tabitha, a voice whispered, "Someone's looking out for you. You are not alone." Warmth, dignity, and hope. Tabitha is a hero of the early church, and her death was a tragic loss. When a widow received a new garment from Tabitha, we know that it meant more than just warmth. But now step back for a moment and examine what Tabitha actually did. What actually occupied her day. The text doesn't say she purchased clothing for these widows, but that she made the clothes. Please grasp this. Tabitha lived an extraordinary existence by devoting herself to a fairly unextraordinary activity. She spent day after day sewing. Tabitha's legacy was that she engaged in the time-consuming process of making clothing by hand and then giving these items away to those who were financially desperate. Jeff Mannion says, this feels a bit, boring to me. Day in and day out, Tabitha sits and sews. If you were to view her through a window at any given moment, her task would look simple, ordinary, and perhaps tedious. What was spectacular about Tabitha was the sheer consistency and faithfulness of her devoted love. She did this again and again and again. Now, most of us desire to live great lives. We fear we will fritter away our days without leaving any discernible mark on our world. But in our quest to live greatly, we search for something great to do, something big. I believe, he says, this to be a huge mistake. Greatness is rarely achieved by doing great things, but instead by doing good things repeatedly. The tragedy is that while waiting for great opportunities to come along, we miss out on a parade of good opportunities that march steadily by. Goodness is largely ignored because it seems too common, too mundane, too everyday. Tabitha arrived at greatness through a lengthy corridor of goodness. That's the Tabitha factor. Tabitha was a rare and remarkable woman because she embraced a holy redundancy. I love that term, a holy redundancy, day in and day out. Above her life hangs a motto that reads, quote, "And then she got up and did it again." Through her compassion, Tabitha provided an outstanding model of consistent service performed in love for those who needed it most. It's a beautiful legacy to follow. This seamstress is a hero of the early church. Now, I don't know about you, but it's often hard for me to think about my legacy. Because often when we think about our legacy, we think about our mortality, right? That at some point we will not be here anymore. And I know it kind of sounds morbid, and maybe this was a project that you did back in high school or college, or maybe somebody had you do it in an adult ed class sometime. But the question of, in this sanctuary, if people were gathered to celebrate your life and your legacy, what would they say? What would you like them to say? What do we want our legacy to be? The thing that no matter what, people will stand and say, Tom was this in my life. Pam was an extraordinary person who gave this gift to me. And I have had the privilege and the honor of officiating at so many funerals where people give up and give beautiful eulogies, describing the legacy of the person they have loved and lost. But I would say that they were able to give that beautiful eulogy because this person, day in and day out, had poured themselves into that person, into that family, into that community, into that church. Had day after day done much like Tabitha did, and did something small or seemingly small that had a major impact on people's lives. And I think of one of my favorite songs by Brian Sergio, who was here just last summer, singer-songwriter and pastor in the United Church of Christ. And he sings about this man named Dan, who he knew, who his gift and his consistent and faithful practice was every single week that there was Sunday school in his church, he was downstairs, standing outside the room where all the kids gathered in the morning, and simply smiling and saying hello to these children. They knew every Sunday that they showed up, Dan was going to be there with that smile, with that encouraging word, and for some, a high five as they went into the room. That was his legacy in that church. And when he died, they put a plaque down at the same place that he stood for all those many years. Saying, Dan stood here, offering his gift of a smile and a greeting to the children of the church. But I can bet that those kids who received that faithful gift remember Dan. And think about your own life. Think about those people who have really made an impact on you. And then when we go to try and put those into words, we can't, because it has not really been those extraordinary moments that have meant so much, but it has been the ordinary moments. Each and every day. Week after week, month after month, year after year. So what is one thing that you can do? And what's one thing you're already doing that has a positive impact on someone else's life? I asked this to the council last Monday night. And it was interesting to get the reaction right away, because it's not usually a question that you hear. What is one consistent thing that you're doing that has a positive impact on people's lives? Because we don't often think about it like that, do we? But then it was amazing to just give a few minutes to let them think about that, and then all of a sudden the answers were coming pretty quickly. And they were coming with a smile, and they were coming with some energy. And, sometimes you go around the circle and people don't really want to share all that much, but it was kind of fun. I mean, Donna, you were there, and you kind of saw that too, that, people were all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I want to go next. I got something to share. Because that's important for us to imagine and know and realize what some of those small, consistent things that we're doing actually do have a positive and transformative impact. But that's for what we do for someone else. And as we think about our legacy, what is also one thing that we feel God calling us to do today and tomorrow and the next day and the next to affect lasting change in our own lives? And just because you're not doing it already doesn't mean you can't start today. But don't get overwhelmed. Don't think that, today you're going to strap on that pair of cross-country skis and, in 2000 and what's going to be the next one, 22, that you're going to be in the Olympics. But look towards that future goal of, when I look back over my life, or when someone else looks back over my life, what is going to be that legacy that I have set? What is going to be that faithful, consistent action that people are going to be able to point to, like Tabitha, and say, my life was better because I knew. We give thanks to God because no matter what steps we take, God is right there with us, encouraging us, supporting us, helping us keep moving forward. And if you get one thing out of this entire 6-week message series, is I hope you will leave with this. Just keep moving forward. God will take you the rest of the way. Thanks be to God. Amen.